So I've seen the idea brought up on the internet that Philadelphia should let Jimmy Butler walk in the offseason because, one, his age, he's approaching 30. 2, he's a bit of an asshole, or just a full-on asshole. 3, he's had injury history. 4, he's going to want a max contract. And 5, the fit with him and this team is perhaps not the best. In terms of, is he willing to play off the ball? Can he operate the way he wants to? And can Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid play off of him with the spacing and all that? So I'll get into that, and then I also want to get into what this would mean for the Sixers' salary and all that stuff, because that's a pretty interesting conversation looking at their cap space with no Jimmy Butler and re-signing Tobias Harris and re-signing JJ Redick and all that. But to dive into the basketball stuff a little bit more, you know, if Jimmy was willing to take a back seat and be content with being a super version of Andre Iguodala, if you will, then that might be the best thing for this team. He's, of course, a better shooter than Iggy, so he may even be able to be capable as a corner shooter and all that. But we all know that Jimmy doesn't want to do that, and he's playing for that max contract and everything. So, you know, that's not ideal, of course. And Jimmy does have a bit of a big head about himself. Some of it's deserved because he was really damn good for a while and was arguably a top 10 guy for maybe a 2 or 3 year stretch. But we see the writing on the wall with where he's going. Even if he can bust out some isolation plays and some pick and rolls late in games, it just doesn't seem like he's going to be content. And even if he is content, even then the spacing and the fit still might not be great. I mean, Robert Covington's spacing was huge for this team, and while you could say that Jimmy Butler is a better player than Covington because his, ability to go off the dribble and all that, teams would not stay glued to him when Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid were doing their thing, the way they would with Covington and all that. So, you look at Tobias Harris and his shooting and his comfort with not being the primary guy on offense, and yeah, it makes sense from a basketball standpoint why it may just be better to have Tobias Harris with these two other guys and not Jimmy Butler in the mix at all. So there's that. Now I guess the flip side, if you want to be optimistic, is maybe Jimmy Butler actually would buy into the idea of not being the primary dude. I mean, I know his defense is still something you can feel good about, so he's always got that as a fallback thing, so he'll never be a negative for you, I guess. I don't know, it's just tough to think that Jimmy would just be fine with being the guy he was in his third season again, So anyway, if we get to the cap situation with this team, if they let Jimmy Butler walk, they would have quite a bit of money to play with. In the sense of they would only have about $40 million committed to this team, and it basically would just be to Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, because Jonathan Simmons has a non-guaranteed contract, and then the rest of the guys are making like under $3 million a year. Now, of course, we're expecting them to re-sign Tobias Harris and re-sign JJ Redick, and we'll say, I think Tobias getting a max is definitely on the table here, because I have to guess that some team could offer him that. Like Brooklyn would probably offer Tobias Harris a max contract. So Philly's going to have to match that. Between that being whatever it would be, 30-something million, and then JJ Redick probably being back for around 10 million or so, you add that 40 million to what they've already got on top of whoever they're going to draft. If I am interpreting their pick correctly, they're going to get their own draft pick, which is going to be in the 20s or whatever. So they're going to be somewhere between $80 and $85 million committed once all these guys are signed, which means, given that the salary cap is going to be $109 million, they do have some options. And it may be best for them to use that cap space on probably a more respectable backup center and just a bunch of shooting, so the Bojan Bogdanoviches of the world come to mind for me. And if they can just litter their rosters with as much shooting as possible around Simmons and Embiid, and Jimmy Butler's kind of a shooter, not really a shooter, also just a jerk, thing is not here, and Tobias Harris is that third guy, then you got JJ Redick, and then other spot shooters, assuming that they just do this roster correctly. They still have James Ennis, which is a nice little thing to have. Then, I mean, I think that team makes a lot of sense. Now, one thing to remember is that Ben Simmons' contract is coming up after next season, and that is going to be a max. So they can't go too crazy with stuff if they wanted to not hit the luxury tax, but because the cap is going to go up again, it's going to end up at $118 million when Ben Simmons becomes a free agent, I'm pretty sure. That does give them a pretty decent buffer to get a little aggressive in free agency, and, you know, I'm just saying, if they were able to nail it with the little moves and don't commit themselves to any bad contracts and just get guys who can fit with the 2 or the 3 main dudes, then, yeah, team looks pretty good. And if you can keep up this 1-year JJ Redick thing, which seems to be the agreement that they've got, then at any time you could just not re-sign him and give yourself just a little bit more money. But maybe they would want to give Redick like a 2 or 3 year deal as like kind of a nod to his commitment for this team and the fact that he keeps playing really well. I mean, he's 34 years old and he's having the best season of his career. Well, arguably. Maybe last year was better, but he's still been great for this team, so it could make sense to commit to him for a few more seasons. Granted, defensively, he is what he is, but they have an option there where maybe Redick would be content with just these 1-year deals again and again, and they could save themselves on some money that way. But I also wouldn't blame Redick for wanting a bit more of a secure deal and all that. So, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I kind of talked myself into them letting Jimmy Butler walk throughout the course of this video, because option B sounds a little better than option A, because I do have my reservations about Jimmy Butler on this team. And does it suck that they lost Robert Covington in the process of this experiment? Yeah, but it does seem like they corrected some things by getting Tobias Harris.